Welcome. How exciting. This is our first Stukely development video. I'm going to try and keep them all to under 6 minutes, so you're not overloaded by me as per usual. And this first video is going to focus on something that I'm calling schema organisers. They'll be more widely known as graphic organisers or by other names, I'm sure. But we're going to go with a schema organiser. And today's video, this video is purely to explain the principles behind them and to introduce where I think we are headed next. I've split the presentation into 4 elements. You've got who, why, what, and where. And I think why might be hidden under my head at the moment, but it will come out. I'll assure you of that. So, without further ado, first of all, we are going to look to see who are our influencers and our influences when it comes to this. Many of you will know these 4 people, or at least some of them. The first one is Tom Sherrington. We've done a lot of work with his books in the past, and his most recent one, where he's combined with Ollie Cav, the walkthroughs book. Now, he may not want to be called a Rose and Shine specialist, but in essence, that's what most of his work is around. John Hutchison, who many of you will have seen on the Research Ed vid a few weeks ago, he's assistant head at Reach Feltham. Rachel and I have been to visit him in his school. He is, in my eyes, curriculum specialist, very strong in that field. You've got Claire Seeley, who I've spoken about for many years. I've been lucky enough to see her speak and visit her school. She's now an education director over in Guernsey. She was a head teacher for many years, and her work on cognition has been fantastic for us as a school. And then we've got Ollie Cav, who came to do a session with us at Stukely tail end of last year. And he is an information designer and has done a lot of work with dual coding. So these 4 have influenced lots of my thoughts and beliefs, especially linked to schema organisers. Right, there they are. Right, why are we doing this? We've got a whole load of knowledge organisers at Stukely now, and we could keep ploughing on with them and tweaking them. However, as this quote suggests, they give us the content, but that content isn't necessarily presented in a way that's going to help children or adults remember it. So this is where schema organisers come in. But I also want to make sure that they're in line with our knowledge curriculum principles. I'm just going to remind you about the principles that Tom Sherrington set out himself. This is in a blog 2 or 3 years ago, I think now. It's still one of the best ones I've read on the subject. And his thoughts are around knowledge doing the following things. They're all listed there. And actually, it's my belief that if we organise it and think about what we want the child's schema to look like, if you like, then to remember it and get it committed to the long term is going to be much easier. So why are we looking at this? For those reasons. We want it all to underpin exactly what we're doing with knowledge at the moment. And that is my statement, really. It's all about precision. Love it or hate it, I've come up with the phrase, the memorable minimum. And that is something that we are going to use when talking about content that we want every single child to remember at the very least. And that includes our slowest graspers or our lowest attainers, if you like. Okay, so there's a bit more of a context there. So we've got our influences and we've got an explanation around the memorable minimum. Right, so what is it? Well, I've jumped ahead. A schema organiser is essentially that. It's a graphic organiser, but it sets out everything that we want the child to commit to memory. It doesn't have any extra fluff or any extra bits and bobs. It's purely and simply the bits that we want them to remember, the memorable minimum, if you like. These things we need to take into account before we build them. Now, first of all, we need to work out what the format is. And I've had quite a few chats with Rachel about this, because although Ollie Cav very helpfully lists the different types of graphic organizer that you can have. I think you can look within that even more, and actually that the format within each subject can take on a number of forms as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But for now, we need to work out what format the schema organizer is going to take. We certainly need to make sure that it works for the children that we're teaching. We need to make sure we've thought about very precisely the knowledge that we need. And we also need to think about how that information is presented. And this, for me, is the key. Because if we take the principles of dual coding and we take the principles of knowledge curriculum, etc., we want to make sure that how we present that information and even the timing of it and the order that is presented is kind of optimum for children to remember it. So we've talked about who our influencers are. We've talked about why we're doing this. We've talked about what a schema organizer is. We're going to finish now by talking about where we go next. So we're now going to have a very quick look at some examples of schema organizers. And then after this video, when we produce more, we're going to focus on each format in turn. So our next development video is going to be about important people schema organizers. And if you're thinking with your subject hat on, or you're thinking with your class teacher hat on, we come across important people or famous people. I think I prefer important people. We come across them in all subject areas. Some more than others, but essentially we are introducing children to famous characters or important people across the whole curriculum. So in our next session, we're going to look at what a schema organizer for that might look like. So I'm just going to bring these last few bits up so we can have one more check. And then just before we go, we're going to have a look at just two examples of schema organizers. So here is one on Poland. This is the final example of the organizer. So this is what potentially children would have in their books, or children would build up to having in their books. But this schema organizer is designed around a location. So this is designed around a place. And I think we would probably have this format for any schema organizer that was around a location. And you'll see, if I just turn it into a presentation, you'll see the way this unfolds is that on the right-hand side of the screen, there's a little bit of context about where that location is or how that location sits with the rest of the world. That disappears. And then we have Ollie Cavstyle. Lots of you will remember his fabulous course of the presentation. Then we have a specific order to how that information is delivered. And there's lots of thought around that. We'll look at this in more detail when we actually look at the location schema organizer. But that is the order that clicks through. I'm obviously doing that incredibly quickly. And then one more quick one to look at before we finish. This is one on important people. So I've got the Beatles, which should link to history and then to music. And with the Beatles, with the important people organizer, there's a bit of context about when they lived, which every important person organizer will start with. And then it splits into this particular one into them as men and them as musicians. And then what it does is it introduces that information in chunks. Images always first, followed by the words in order to kind of challenge children. So I'm going to leave it there. Please watch this again to clarify anything you're not sure on. We're going to be talking about this as a group of staff. And then following up on this, we will have an introduction to each individual schema organizer. There we go. Thanks very much. See you later.